culture is absolutely everything, because the Agile Manifesto is, at the end of the day, it's about values. It's not about a process. So if you don't have those values, you're not agile.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Hunter Strategy Podcast, a new podcast where we explore topics in cloud, digital transformation, government technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Matt Triner, and today we're diving headfirst into a topic that has become increasingly important in the realm of digital transformation methodologies, anti-patterns in Agile. In this episode, we'll explore the dark corners of Agile practices, uncovering common pitfalls, misconceptions, and counterproductive behaviors that can hinder your team's progress and undermine the very principles that Agile is built upon. As we journey through the episode, we'll shed light on the warning signs, analyze root causes, and most importantly, offer actionable strategies to avoid or mitigate these anti-patterns. Whether you're a seasoned Agile practitioner or just dipping your toes into Agile waters for the first time, this discussion should provide valuable insights and guidance to help your team steer clear of these treacherous traps and achieve a smoother and more effective Agile implementation. So grab your headphones and get ready to embark on a journey through the world of anti-patterns in Agile as we equip you with knowledge and tools to become an Agile hunter, hunting down the obstacles and fostering a more agile and efficient, productive environment for your projects. I am joined today by Jeff Siegel and Greg Venor, CTO and Director of Software Engineering for Hunter Strategy, respectively. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So as we talk through this kind of concept of anti-patterns in Agile, I think it's important we set up some definitions. What are anti-patterns in Agile, and why are they significant concerns for organizations and Agile teams? Jeff, why don't I pass that to you first?
Sure. I think the thing with Agile is that even though you can go to a website and see, such as the SAFe website, people have heard that, a huge laundry list of things that make up the process. I think at the same time, the entire point of this as a process to run a software program better is to be agile, as the name implies, to change as necessary, to not be as rigidly stuck on a certain set of procedures that apply to every program, for every type of customer, every type of industry, with every type of team. So I think that manifests itself in a lot of ways. I think in general, one of the biggest things, and maybe this is a broad example, but just kind of an over adherence to a sort of agile gospel that you must follow this playbook, and not necessarily understanding why do these processes actually exist, especially prevalent if folks have kind of gotten some training. They did their 2-week Scrum Master course, and they're just like, well, but my Scrum Master course said I had to do this, and without really stopping to go, well, okay, but my real world experience has told me otherwise, and so let's maybe at least put those two together and come up with something reasonable, rather than just saying, what the great holy book of Agile tells me we do this and that is it. So I think broadly that's probably what I would say there.
Greg, what about you?
Well, I really concur, and I think Jeff is spot on. He actually listed the two most common Agile anti-patterns that I see personally, Scrum and SAFe. I don't even know if Scrum and SAFe are Agile. They are basically waterfall processes cloaked in the Agile terminology to make them warm and cozy to more traditional business entities. Biggest anti-pattern with Agile is basically adhering, like Jeff said, adhering to a rigid process and not really internalizing and keeping the Agile Manifesto as your core values and how you operate your team.
One thing I just add from my experience is I think that definitionally when Agile overtakes the outcome of the project that you're actually trying to impose, then you're doing a process, you're not doing a project, and or building a product, as we try to think of it here in general.
Yes.
And I think that can create an interesting definition around an anti-pattern, because
Yeah.
if the purpose of Agile is to foster development, then inherently forgetting about the outcome of what you're trying to develop, or overemphasizing Agile over the outcome, because it's a balance. It always is. Any overhead process will be a balance. So
I think
go
if
ahead.
I can come in, I definitely understand where guys are coming from on safe. I probably do on Scrum, but I'm more curious on Scrum of like maybe just a detail or two of how your reasons for including that.
It depends, and sometimes it comes down to the practice. So if you are doing Scrum in the sense of maybe like a person is entering the industry, they take their Scrum training and they follow the process rigidly. They're probably not even taught Agile values. They're just told this is how you do it. And
Mhm.
when you're actually executing it without any kind of backing there, you're basically just doing time-boxed waterfall where you pre-plan your activities for 3 weeks and then repeat. There's really
Yeah.
nothing much else there with Scrum. So you almost always have to deviate from Scrum to be agile. And when Scrum started, it started as a way to kind of deliver XP, to put a business friendly wrapper on top of it. And people have kind of forgotten that. And the more controversial parts of XP that were really rooted in agile theory kind of got dropped from Scrum. And Scrum itself as an organization doesn't really talk about that anymore. So Scrum, you should really also think about how Scrum was adopted by all of the organizations that were nervous about Agile, that were looking for a replacement for waterfall processes. That's where it's most popular.
Would it be putting words in your mouth to say that you sort of view it as being an otherwise useful theory and I don't even want to say the word process, but something that was
Yeah.
co-opted by people wearing nice suits, to fit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, and I would say, really, to Matt's point, often what I see with Scrum is the glorification of the process over the outcome. I've seen teams get so into their metrics, their burn down charts, their velocity charts, their estimation ceremonies. And sometimes it becomes all success is measured on your process numbers, and not how fast are you developing features? How fast are you delivering? What's your quality ratio? What's your defect to code ratio? And things that matter to users, and losing that perspective of being user focused, which happens a lot on Scrum projects, at least in my experience, is a big problem.
Yeah, and it's understandable, I think, in a lot of customer spaces where they're really trying to implement. They've heard good things.
Yeah.
Somebody has told them you should run your software projects differently, and so I think it's coming from a place of a desire for improvement that is understandable. But yeah, I think it's easy to get wrapped around the axle on. Well, we want to, like, they told us we should be agile, so like just hyper focus on that, ahead of actual results that it's supposed to achieve.
And I will say fast waterfall is better than slow waterfall.
Right.
Well, one thing you pointed out is you talked about how Scrum was kind of an evolution to make more business friendly XP, or extreme programming. It feels like extreme programming has gotten this bad rap in the last few years. And although I think it's having a bit of a resurgence as these anti-patterns are getting recognized, it seems as though people think that extreme programming is a bunch of guys, or guys and girls, pounding Red Bull in a basement, no rules, total lawlessness, and insanity. And I feel like that's not how XP started. That's not really what was meant by it, by real practitioners of it. But it feels like the business side of Agile has tried really hard to create that narrative around extreme programming, so that that's the bad way of doing Agile, when in fact it's many people, and again, like I said, there is kind of an evolution here, but it seems as though people are finally coming around to realize that no, that is actually what the Agile Manifesto was about how to bring some order to a version of extreme programming that is insane, but not to eliminate the concept that are underlying XP.
Well, So XP was the first methodology that a defined process that came out of the Agile Manifesto. I don't think it was the other way around. But to your point, that was early criticisms of all of Agile. I mean, it was not uncommon to hear when Agile started catching on that it's like, oh, we don't plan and we don't document because we're Agile. It's like, dudes, that is not my dudes and ladies. That is not what you're supposed to do. You can still document yourself, your process, your code, your technical engineering decisions. You can still spend time designing. It doesn't have to be completely chaos and seat of the pants. Like I know that Waterfall would say, oh, we're going to spend 3 months designing, and then you're going to spend 9 months implementing those designs rigidly. But that's, the abandoning Waterfall doesn't mean that you abandon documentation and design. That's been one of my pet peeves with Agile for a long time. And I know why people didn't want to do it, because it's the hard part and the boring part. That people want to code. It's more fun. It's more interesting.
It feels like an inherent pattern or inherent anti-pattern, better way of saying it, is to use Agile as a term to basically do whatever you feel like doing or not do whatever you don't feel like doing. And it's all kind of cloaked under the because we're Agile.
Right.
So with that kind of thought, can you guys think of some real world examples of where these anti-patterns have affected a project, and maybe some as tangible as you can in a software project, some tangible things that occurred because of those anti-patterns?
Sure,
Absolutely.
I'll jump in. I mean, and forgive me if you've heard this from me before, but maybe folks listening have not, obviously. My number one pet peeve, I think, is the usage of story points for accountability rather than planning. And maybe similar to, maybe I'm too understanding of the people implementing these processes and their motivations when they get used badly. But a big challenge is how, if you're paying for an Agile team, how do you know that you're getting what you paid for? Totally fair question. It's your money, obviously. If you hire a plumber, you want to do the same thing. Now, it's a lot harder to know your toilet is either leaking or it's not leaking. That's pretty. I don't know anything about toilets, but I can at least I can know if I hired a good plumber or not. Whereas if I hired an Agile team, even as a software developer, I might have a hard time knowing if I really was getting what I paid for. So recognizing that's a hard problem, but we can at least say, I think pretty emphatically, I can say that story points are not there to tell you how much you're getting for your dollar. And unfortunately, we've seen that a lot, where story points just kind of get turned into a notion of delivery that, of course, replaces actual value. So I think where does that actually do to a team at the individual level? If you've ever been a developer on a team with this kind of system, you're constantly worrying about points rather than, is this feature actually going to do what it's supposed to do? Should I speak up? What if I found a little thing? Should I say anything? Should I say a thing that ultimately I know is going to improve this feature? Or should I, it means I'm not going to finish this ticket, or it means some kind of thing related to the storyboard process is going to impact me negatively. I'm probably going to keep my mouth shut on that, and the product's going to suffer at the end of the day. Tech debt grows because if you're faced with, as a developer, you have all these little micro decisions and everything you do. Oh man, I could do this a little bit better. Oh, this unit test is like, it's okay, but I could cover these cases and do things cleaner. I could, make the test run faster by removing a bunch of unnecessary dependencies. All these little things, and you go, but man, that would take me this extra time. And I think a lot of the root of evil, so to speak, in a lot of those cases is this gamification of accountability, or whatever you want to call it, on these individual points. Like, you can absolutely, as somebody who manages software teams, like I want to know that that the teams that we put out to solve problems for customers are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't want to have people who just aren't qualified or aren't working what they should be. For obviously we care about that, but just there are better ways for sure than just, hey, how many points did this person finish? Hey, person A did 13. They must, great. Give them a raise. Person B did 7. Oh, we'll put them on a performance plan. Like, that's insane to me.
Yeah.
And Greg, what about some examples from your experience?
Well, very similar to what Jeff's talking about, on teams that have basically been measured by their made up story point metrics. In combination, so Scrum has this idea of commitment, and I've seen teams that have fallen into traps where they're either overcommitting and then basically doing death marches, like classic waterfall projects from back in the days of yore, or they're undercommitting, but then in order to keep the sprint metrics clean, they just idle for the sprint. So you end up, really, it's like you're either in a horrible work environment where you're constantly overworking, or your customers are not getting the value that they need to get. And that's really bad too.
So I think that it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the things you're talking about here can be attributed to team culture and understanding that, there's a business or a mission that has timelines and things that are external to the agile process that are real, that are why everybody's getting paid to have a salary on the team. There's an underlying business or mission or otherwise funded need. What role does culture play in the creation of anti-patterns, and how do you think organizations can balance those external needs and culture to foster a healthier and more effective agile environment?
It's everything. I mean, culture is absolutely everything, because the Agile Manifesto is, at the end of the day, it's about values. It's not about a process. So if you don't have those values, you're not agile. Agile is really about being flexible and not adhering to a specific process. So you can start with a process like Scrum or XP or, God forbid, SAFe, and modify it to your needs. But if you're not modifying it to your needs, if you're not following those values, putting people over process and user experiences first, all that stuff, you're not doing that, you're not being agile, regardless of what process you have chosen to follow. And I would, in fact, I would say, if you pick a process, even a quote unquote agile one, and rigidly follow it, you're not agile, period. So yeah, culture is 100% everything.
So maybe the process is just repeat those mantras every day at stand-up.
Right. Yes, that's right. You get a big stick, you go around.
Say the Agile Manifesto, say those words.
But it's interesting because we as a consulting company deal with contracts a lot, and contracts are around the triple D's, right? Your dollars, dates, and deliverables. And I've always struggled to reconcile that with agile. And it's kind of to Jeff's point of, how does the customer know they're getting what they paid for? At least from a team management perspective, I think pair programming is actually one way to solve the problem of team productivity. Like, let's not make up points and then measure the closure rate of points. If we pair programmed, then you basically have constant visibility into what everyone is doing across the entire team. And trust is so important for agile teams, because you have to put your people first and trust that they are going to align themselves to your business values and business goals, and understand what's needed to execute and deliver value to the customer and win more business.
Yeah, that's a really good point on pair programming. I think that if I think back to, like, when do I feel best about how things are going, about my own understanding of things on the ground, to your point about that, but then also, of course, how we're able to deliver value and everything. I constantly think back to all the pair programming sessions I do, and it's sort of so many purposes. It's I can see what's happening as somebody managing it, but a lot of times in a lot of projects, like, I wrote some code in the beginning of a project and then I ran off and did other things, and now a new developer has no context. They inherited my code and go, oh, what idiot wrote that, and that whole thing. But I can understand what's being done with that now. And obviously, because I wrote whatever it was, I'm probably going to know how to change it and give context. So the developer who's inherited it now, they're going to have so much of a better understanding and
Yeah.
yeah. And so, okay, measuring that and the sort of the objective side of that, okay, well, I don't know what, I don't know what you do with it, but I think Agile tells us not to get hung up on that, right?
Yeah.
That's the people over processes portion.
Well, I mean, I think measuring developer productivity is really difficult. You can go see many hot takes and discussions on that whole topic, probably worth the podcast in and of itself. But when you do UIs, you do things like time to interactive, and you have metrics like that you measure and you track and you try to improve. And I think there are metrics that we can have, like how long between delivery, how long between discovering a defect and fixing it. There are metrics that we can create and track that will show how effective the team is operating, maybe not the individual, but that at least gives you a starting point into where you can focus attention. And agility is so many things. Like, if you have to be able to deliver fast, that means you have to have automated tests, because you can't wait for a long manual process to test. You have to be able to wrap that into your CI/CD pipelines so that you can act as quickly as you possibly can. You can react, and that is empowering teams to refactor code, make changes in code, and know that they're not breaking the whole system. So there even comes interplay into your architecture and design and how you're putting your software together to really be agile. It's more than just process. It goes deep into the technical layer too.
Definitely. And and one other sort of practical culture thing worth mentioning that I've seen both sides is making sure that the leadership of a program is not overbearing, that it's all, the whole thing is about the inverted pyramid, right? Team, everybody's a team member, and doesn't necessarily fit any given role. Everybody has different set of experiences, different set of background that they bring to the program, and then they have their day-to-day experiences on the program, and that's all super relevant, and they might be very different. And if you kind of have a program that's run in a way where people just don't really feel comfortable even voicing an opinion, then you're in trouble right there from day one.
Yeah.
You're just not going to have you're not going to have processes that actually work for the team. You'll have somebody at the top maybe thinks that they are, but they're just not.
So the most unhealthy projects I've ever come upon were overly concerned with individual blame for issues.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how culture can play into development of anti-patterns and how you can foster a healthier one. What is the effect on morale of team members when these anti-patterns have developed? Like, what's the cautionary tale? Why, it's obviously, we all sit here, we've run on development projects, we've done agile projects, we've done waterfall projects, and we all have strong opinions about it. But if you had to add the human element to what happens when these patterns are kind of cemented, what do you guys think about in terms of the morale impact to developers when these are done improperly?
I think people first, they lose respect for the agile process in general, especially if this is their first time with it, and they say, "Oh, this is garbage. This isn't even." And there's a lot of eye rolling, right? And which is and of course, it's oftentimes very warranted if people are doing the anti-patterns we're talking about here. But then you can kind of get into this downward spiral where everything just seems like a bunch of people who don't really know what they're doing, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic and not actually achieving anything useful. So I think, and that just spirals into losing respect for the leadership of the team and the project in general. So, I guess it just comes down to everybody buying into, does this make sense? Does my day-to-day life, how I do tasks here, does this make sense? Does it actually contribute to making a better product? Is this remotely sensible, or are we just doing things that, and so if you do end up in that world where it's just things don't seem to make sense. For example, I guess another anti-pattern that's in that same vein is sprint retrospectives, right? One of our lovely ceremonies. If the team is giving some similar feedback every single retrospective and nothing changes again and again and again, then you just kind of say, all right, well, what's the point? And yeah, it just spirals downhill real
That's a
fast.
good one. That's a really good one.
And Greg, what has been your experience with morale impact of some of these anti-patterns, or if there's anything to add? I think Jeff did cover quite a bit.
What I would add, I think the strongest thing to add, that's at least the most different from what Jeff was saying, is the connection to the users. Your Agile process, because you're delivering user value, your users have to be involved in some way. That doesn't mean that you're literally, well, there's many ways that can happen, but the point is you have to get feedback, and you have to get fast feedback, because that's part of being Agile and being able to iterate quickly. So if you have an arcane delivery process where you work on your feature and you mark your story done in Jira being another anti-pattern for Agile, but we won't get into that right now. You mark your story done in Jira, and then you just take your next story, and you're not working with users. You don't know if you actually solved the user's problem. There's no communication. You get a lot of satisfaction as a developer with that that turnaround, the interaction, knowing that what you're working on is delivering that value and solving the problem for your users, knowing that some human is deriving value and worth from your work. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think one cautionary tale I would or in that vein is kind of, one of the so teams you should avoid teams getting above a certain size, and not even to dictate size, all that. But one of the if you let that happen, oftentimes you end up building this whole leadership layer, in which is very problematic, and ultimately can now stratify what individuals go to what meetings, do what interactions, and essentially can result in that situation where the person doing the thing didn't even go to the design meetings related to the thing, and they didn't hear that direct feedback from the if not the users themselves, then the product owner, the person trying to represent the stakeholders' interests and such. And yeah, that can definitely be demoralizing, or just even if it's not demoralizing, it's just kind of, you feel like you're in a vacuum if you're that person building the feature and you don't have that connection.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to feel like a cog in a wheel.
Yep.
Because this job, we like to make analogies to factories, like the whole lean thing, even though we're not a factory. Some people call development environments software factories, even though, like, again, I don't think that's really a good analogy. And we tend to also analogize to construction industry, architecture and construction. You hear those words too. And then that kind of language, we start to internalize and think of developers as just part of some assembly line process. But developing is creative. You are working in languages that humans don't speak. You have to be able to think abstractly. You have to be able to essentially solve problems and think with scientific rigor and structure your thoughts and come up with creative ways that involve you to create mental models of how things work in a computer and how to analogize that and convert that to what humans expect. And that uses a brain and requires a human or so sufficiently advanced AI, another podcast, to come up with that solution. And, people who are doing creative work don't like to feel like they're part of a pipeline. If you were doing artwork for a video game, if you just worked on an inbox of draw a picture of X, Y, and Z, and you never got feedback from another human being, you just drew pictures and turned them in and filed them somewhere, and that was the end of it, you'd probably be demoralized in that position as well. People ultimately, we're social animals. We like to interact, even the introverted ones. It's just a matter of how much we can interact, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yes, there's definitely, I think, a lot of sort of assumption of the way developers' personalities are, and engineers couldn't possibly have human emotions. That's not a real thing, is it?
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the negative sides and the downsides of anti-patterns and how that affects morale and how that affects things. Let's talk a little bit about success stories, more specifically, either where you've greenfielded a project that properly did this, or where, probably even more interesting, where you've overcome an anti-pattern in an existing project that kind of had that pattern cement.
Sure. So, well, it's interesting because I see it go the other way, as in organizations want to kind of grip harder versus loosen their grip as projects go on. So it's tough to come up with examples. But I will say I'm working a project right now where we've been trying to very clearly avoid problems with Scrum. Now that was mandated by the customer who initiated the contract that it had to be Scrum. So, but we've been pretty clear about we don't want to fall into the trap of commitment and either overworking or underworking. Everybody knows that when they are done, if there's nothing available, we can work as a team to figure out what's logically following, and everybody's always engaged. And we've worked really hard to foster lots of communication on the team so nobody feels isolated. We don't do pair programming, but we've tried to create sort of like 2 or 3 person mini teams of everybody that can co-work with each other. And it seems to be pretty successful so far in terms of team morale and people feeling confident and productive with their work. So that's my example for
And
now.
I mean, I would at least, I could probably speak to one where we won. I would say we won the argument on with the customer on story point accountability, to the point where it more or less got dropped, and they'd said, yeah, okay, fair, please just use it, don't worry about that, just use it for planning purposes and so forth. I think, just to go back on a hit list of some things I've already talked about, we kind of got some of that team leadership to back down a little bit, let everybody else, promote other voices on the team. Maybe the biggest thing was sort of we were able to remove processes that weren't really making sense, that I think were just there because the book said we were supposed to do it. But it doesn't mean we just said, oh, cancel all the meetings and just everybody just go free for all. We did actually add new process where it made sense. And I kind of just touched on this a second ago, but I do think it's an obvious thing, but like seen it not happen so many times. It's just like tracking sprint retrospective suggestions rather than just chuck it all into a document and say, well, we documented it. Cool. But actually circling back and saying, did we really do this? Did we really do this? Because otherwise, like, why are we wasting our time? Quite frankly, if you say, we can't be bothered for that, don't have the retro. And I will say, I don't think we've gone that far in any programs I've been involved in, but maybe we should have in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just in looking to wrap up here, I want to see if there's anything in summary that you guys want to give to listeners and to people that are going to, kind of look at Agile for the first time or are frustrated with their Agile project. If you could boil down to a single bit of advice and I'm talking specifically to developers that are in that process as opposed to the organizations they're in. We've been talking a lot to the organizations. How can developers help to foster this in their environment? How can they feel better and survive to get to better pastures? How can they affect things from the position that they sit in?
I think I would just simply say to that developer, it is your process, own it, do with it what you will, even if maybe your management is pushing you in one direction or the other, stiffen your backbone, make an argument for, speak truth to power on, hey, this is silly, let's not do this. You will gain the respect of your peers and your managers, and you'll affect positive change.
Exactly that. I think there's really no choice but to communicate. And if communication doesn't work, put your head down and start floating your resume.
There's a lot of truth to that. And one thing we did talk about before when it came to the morale impact is good developers have options. Good developers make a lot of money. Even good junior developers or good mid-level developers. At Hunter, we're always looking for them. There's all kinds of organizations in this talent crunch because there aren't that many people that are available that have that skill set, because the ones that have that skill set already have a job. And so I think it's important for organizations to understand that if you don't foster this in a way that is good to your organization, you're not going to have your developers for much longer. And Agile will not fix the skill gap and the capability gap that a lot of underperforming development teams frequently have. So I think that's a good mix of both a positive note to developers. I do think that Jeff's note about being opinionated, having thoughts, reading the manifesto, getting educated on the Agile process that your Scrum Master or your Agile coach is bringing is really important, because if you're not educated on their terminology, on their lexicon, on their values, then how are you going to challenge it in their terms? How are you going to bring that truth to power in a way that doesn't just sound like, well, we need to tame those rascal developers, right? Developers need to own, to Jeff's point, it's your process too. You need to know how it works. You need to know why it's good. We're not the only people talking about this. We took this topic and these questions from the many great minds out there that are having this discussion right now, because we're at a really important inflection point in the maturity of Agile in the software industry, that we all need to understand what's doing, what's working, and what's not. And while there's certainly always going to be organizations that are going to pull you into a big business process that isn't supporting outcomes or customers, there's always going to be a challenging organization trying to compete with that organization that's going to take the outcome and customer-based approach. So it's kind of evolve or perish, so to speak. So I definitely think that there's a lot of really good points here. So thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. I really appreciate this, and I hope to join you guys next time on some other topics on the Hunter podcast. Thank you, gentlemen.
My
Looking
pleasure.
forward to it. Thank you.